What's up, guys? Popgar here. Haven't made a video in a long time. Figured it'd be fun to do. I just did the Global Game Jam yesterday, so I made a cool little game that I can show off. I think most people at this point know that I make games, so I figured I'd show off what I did and talk about it a little bit. So the theme was Lost and Found, and so I decided to make a game where you are lost at sea is the idea. It definitely didn't turn out quite as well as I had hoped, but I think it's kind of there's a lot of neat things and a lot of neat stuff that I did that I kind of had as goals too that I managed to at least partially complete. So I figured be fun to look at. So this is a program called Unity. I'm looking around right now. This is kind of the main scene for my game. And so you can see all that's really here is this boat, and the reason the boat's all that's really here, and a couple of things like a camera and some lighting, is the other pieces in here. This is basically the list of everything in the scene. Most of it's generated by this world manager here that's going to do a whole bunch of generation steps to kind of create the world. So I made kind of a infinitely, spawns infinitely in every direction, generates as you move through it. So let me load up the game and show you what it looks like, and I'll talk a little bit about it as I go. So there's some controls on screen, but I already know the controls, so you need to see that. You log into the game as a boat. It spawns all these cool islands around you. And this is your health bar. It's kind of slowly ticks down over time, so it's a survival game kind of a little bit. Your goal is to find islands that have either food, which are these little things here, which will increase your health, or clues that'll make it more likely for you to get found. So you run around, you grab these, I'm back to full life. I can jump back on the boat, drive around again. And try to find, that was more food, I'm trying to find some clues. Whee! You can kind of go over jumps this boat, so you gotta be a little careful. If your boat flips upside down, it will sink, and it'll sink really fast, and then you'll take massive damage and probably die. And the chairs are clues, so you can grab those clues. Usually it takes about 5 clues before you have 4 or 5 clues before you have a pretty reasonable chance of finding the rescue ship, although as soon as you have one it can spawn. It's exponentially more likely for it to spawn based on the number of clues you've accumulated. So if I find 4 or 5 to be kind of the sweet spot of okay, at that point it's a little silly to bother picking up clues unless they're just really right in front of you, and it's really time to kind of go looking in slightly deep water for the boat to rescue you, just because they don't spawn they can spawn kind of near islands, but they only spawn on mostly underwater tiles, so they often do not spawn super close to islands. So you often, while you're walking around an island, sometimes you'll see one spawn in the distance. They also only spawn on tiles that you're kind of coming into view. So obviously, because I'm spawning things infinitely, you can't keep all of that in memory at once. You can't set it all infinitely up ahead of time. Okay, I think I got 5. So basically, as things are getting created, I load them into memory, and then when I load them into memory, there's a chance for a ship to spawn in. Hey, we found the ship. And so then I just run onto the ship. I didn't lose all my life, and you can see it says you win. So that's pretty much the main game. If you want to see some of the auto generation, it can be kind of cool to look at. If I pause the game right now, I have to it's not where we started, so I have to kind of go over to it, since I traveled a bunch through the world. But you can see it kind of keeps a square around you in memory, and it's basically there's tiles of this water. The tiles of the water actually basically they never get recreated. There's nothing really new to do about them. It's just as soon as you get to as soon as you move your center from here to here, it'll take this section of water tiles, and basically it automatically moves them over to this side. So that's what happens, and then as you can probably see, so these train tiles are also being generated. They're a little bit more interesting. I originally had them working the same way, where it just kind of took the one over here and moved it over here to the other side, and then would, which is hard to grab, I think, because it's inside the water tile, but would move it over to the other side, and then just kind of redo the height map and redo the texturing on it. But something about resetting the neighbors was causing these really ugly black seams, I think because of lighting issues is my guess. So I ended up just kind of deleting the ones here and recreating them here, which made it a little bit laggier when new chunks load in, so it was a little bit unfortunate that I had to go that route. But once I did that, it looked correct. It looked really good. So and so let me go up here. Under World Generator, I kind of bucket them. This is not really actually important to anything about them, but it makes it nice and easy to hide big sections of them and show them. And so you can see what the the world looks like under the water. So you can't actually like walk along the seafloor. I didn't do it very much because if your head's underwater, you start taking, again, a lot of damage. But yeah, basically these kind of like mountainous areas form, obviously mostly underwater. I'm using simplex noise for this, which is a little bit like Perlin noise, which is the same kind of random generation you tend to do on things like Minecraft. I'm doing it in 2D instead of 3D, even though this is a 3D game. But the difference is this is a height map, so I'm kind of deforming up and down over a 2D space. So every 2D point only has one value, which is the height. Whereas in Minecraft, it's kind of thresholded 3D where you're actually seeing at any given point whether it's whether you should put something there or not, which is why you can have things like overhangs. So like this could never have a mountain with an overhang or a cave or anything like that, because it's actually really 2D with a height rather than I guess it's kind of, this is 3D and Minecraft is 4D in terms of its generation is almost the right way to think about it. But yeah, I've written, I don't know if I've ever shared that on this channel, but I've written a little Minecraft clone that does that kind of generation. This is doing dynamic texturing too. As you can tell, everything underwater is sand. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of texturing it based on height, and then I'm using another kind of simplex noise at a different rate to kind of perturb it so that it's not totally uniform by height. I actually kind of messed up. I had meant to do sand on the bottom and then this kind of rocky stuff between the sand and the grass, and kind of the grass more on top. But obviously, as you can kind of see, I must have reversed it at some point. But it still looks pretty good. It looks pretty cool. There's a lot more I wanted to do with the generation, especially with placing objects. I do obviously place these little objects here, but I don't do a ton of object placement. So I can talk a little bit about how I do object placement here too, which is not super complicated, but it's kind of interesting. So what I do is when I'm generating these tiles, I keep track of the highest point that I've seen when doing the height generation of any given tile, and which is why this here is at this little, it's kind of at this seam, because this must be the highest point in this tile. And if you look down here, you can probably tell, oh yeah, that's the highest point in this tile, and likewise, this is the highest point in that tile. And so what I do is I find the highest point in the tile, the highest point in the height map in the tile. I mean, this point here might be slightly higher. And I basically say, hey, I know this point is above water because I know what the highest point is. I know that highest point is above water. So this is going to be above water, and I'm taking the highest point on this tile as just the marker spot. And then I basically just use a uniform random thing to say, there's like a 10% chance of spawning something, and then it's 50-50 whether it spawns the chairs, which are the clues, or the little house things over here. So other cool things I did other than the little random generation, which is pretty basic as random generation goes, and it's not perfect. Like I said, I think I got the textures backwards from what I wanted, and you do see weird things too. There's no examples here, but a lot of times the highest point on one will be like the same as the highest point on another, so you'll end up with something spawned here and then something spawned on this one right over here. This one actually looks like it might not be it. The highest point might be in this corner over here, but you get weird things like that. Other cool things that I did in this game, I made the boat controller, and the boat controller is kind of neat. So originally I made the boat controller completely ignore physics at all. I just wrote a kind of very simple pseudo physics stuff like velocity, acceleration, on a little boat controller. I mean, it took me like 10 minutes to do. It wasn't a big deal that I had to throw it out, but I ended up feeling like, one, it worked pretty well in terms of how it looked, but you were moving across the water in a very not bouncy way. It was pretty smooth. And two, you would just drive through the mountains unless you had a collider on you. And if you did have a collider on you, the controller would kind of interact with it, but it wouldn't interact with it correctly because it wasn't actually applying physics forces. It was doing this kind of other stuff. You can make those kind of mesh together, but rather than do that, I said, well, why don't I just ignore that and try to use an actual physics controller? And my first attempt at that basically treated the water as a physics object too, where it was a giant plane. I learned after a little while that really wasn't doing what I wanted to either, kind of for the same reason the first one didn't. The water was nice and smooth. There was no real bounce to it. You would also sometimes hit seams in the water, even though they were supposed to be level, and you'd catch on a seam and you go flying, which is, again, something I could probably fix, but I didn't want to bother fixing that. And so what I ended up doing was saying the water is not a physics object at all, even though the boat is. All of these tiles are. So if you walk into the water, you'll go along the ground. And what I did instead is I implemented a buoyancy system. What I probably should have done to implement that buoyancy system is to look up how to do it, which is not what I did. I just did it by the seat of my pants. And you can see the boat, it looks okay. It works pretty well. It has some wonkiness. But let me talk a little bit about how I chose to do that. So what I did is, if we look at this boat, and we open up the area under the boat, so there's a boat, there's a whole bunch of cube things. I put a bottom weight on because it was weighted really funny. There might be a better way to do this. I didn't know how to change the weight distribution on a boat. It seemed to just be averaging the kind of areas that are filled up by these box colliders, or these colliders. And so mostly it was all going to, I basically put a collider on this cube. I don't know why it's called a cube. It's actually the shell of the boat here. And you can see it's in green over here, and that worked pretty well, but it was a little too top heavy when it really should be bottom heavy, because it basically was acting like this middle part was filled in. So to get around that, I added an extra weight just kind of going along the bottom, which you can kind of see inside the boat here, just to basically have the boat a little bit more bottom heavy, so it moved a little bit more what I felt like was a little bit more realistically. It's still a very cartoony physics feel to the boat. And then I basically, to do the buoyancy, I made these things called buoyancy points. And so I just added 6, and I can just kind of click them one at a time, and you can see them kind of floating in space. It's a little hard to tell exactly where they are, but they're basically evenly spaced along a rectangle at the bottom of the boat. There's 6 of them. And whenever one of them goes underwater, I apply a physics force up towards vector positive y, basically straight up in the air, wherever that is, based on how deep it is. So the deeper it is, the higher the force pushing it up. And it works pretty well. I tried it with less than 6, and the boat was a wobbly mess. I originally tried it with 1, which I should have known wouldn't work. And obviously, when you have a single buoyancy point, the float just flips around everywhere because there's nothing to keep it balanced on both sides. But yeah, that's how I did it. After I did it, I was like, oh, I bet people have tutorials on how to do this right. And I looked it up, and there's some tutorials about actually checking all the quads on the bottom of your object and applying forces to their... I guess the reverse of their normal. So this, this one here would push this way basically, which probably would have been more accurate. Would have probably been more expensive to do too, rather than just doing 6 points. This is probably like 10, and the math is probably a little more complex than just pushing straight up in Y. But yeah, so that was kind of cool. And yeah, so this is the little project I made in 2 days. I can't think of anything else to really say about it. I did most of it myself. I don't know if you heard the music in the background. One of my co-game jammers did that. I should give credit to things that I stole relentlessly from. These are like open source things on the web, so it's not like a big deal that I stole them. Textures on various things here were CC0 textures I found on the web. I wish I could give credit, but I don't honestly remember where I even found them. Same is true for the little models I used on the island. Those were CC0 models I found on the web. And this boat is from Kenny's. He has an asset pack for boats. If you don't know kenny.nl, it's a great site. I could probably bring it up real fast. That's not the one I was going to show. Maybe I'll show that in a second. The character model, it bugs me constantly when it comes up. I don't remember its name, but I can look it up real fast. Invector. So that was just a free, basically a third-person character controller you can get. I already implemented the boat controller. Really didn't want to implement a character controller. I modified it slightly to be able to take the keyboard inputs to use things and to jump on and off the boat. Oh, and one thing I didn't show, which I guess I can restart this and show real quick, is you can also flip the boat. Let me get this help out of the way. So if we park on land and you get off, another thing you can do is walk up to the boat and hold E, and well, I didn't really want to flip it upside down. If I go up to it in the water, press E, I can flip it right side up. Whee! And then it dipped in the water, so it kind of jumped way too high. It's actually hard to get it not to flip like crazy once you do that. Oh, I can also show you the fact that when I'm in the water, my health starts going down really fast because I'm drowning. I stole that. And then the other thing I kind of stole, I did type in the lines of code. I did a tutorial about how to make this cool semi-transparent toon shaded water texture, which is how I envisioned the art for the whole game being, but I'm not really an artist, so I ended up with just kind of more normal textures for most of the other stuff, like the islands and the random objects, since my ability is mostly grabbing three things off the internet for art. But the water texture I wanted to show the site for, since that was pretty cool. It's over here. It's about how to make a Toon water shader. From Roystan, it looked like he also had something about how to do just a normal Toon shader to get kind of a Zelda-y Breath of the Wild type look. So yeah, super cool site to check out. Yeah, I can't think of anything else to say. That's the game I made. It was fun to do, had a good weekend, and wanted to make a little YouTube video. All right, take it easy, guys.